I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, the International Criminal Court's decision to launch an investigation against Israel. The International Criminal Court, ICC, recently made headlines when it ruled on the question of jurisdiction in what is called the situation in Palestine. The ICC decided to accept the prosecutor's position and confirmed that Palestine is a state party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, establishing the court, signed in 2002. This means that it qualifies Palestine as the territory of which the conduct in question occurred, and therefore that the ICC's territorial jurisdiction extends to the territories occupied by Israel since 1967 in the terms of the court, namely Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Pursuant to the judgment, an announcement was made of a launch of an investigation into the 2014 Operation Protective Edge that Israel conducted against Hamas in Gaza by the prosecutor. Let it be said that Israel's investigative, prosecutorial, and judicial systems are steadfast, including vis-a-vis the IDF, and its court held in high regard. It is clear, though, that the decision poses a potential, albeit maybe not immediate, risk of prosecution and the implications which can reach far beyond 2014 and far beyond Israel. This applies not only to Israel's political leadership, but also to high and possibly low-ranking officers and soldiers of the IDF. Due to the unique nature of its conflicts and the immoral nature of its terrorist enemies, Israel faces a most complex, if not unparalleled, situation on the battlefield. These complexities trickle down almost on a daily basis to what we call the corporal level, also known by the nickname the strategic corporal, due to the far-reaching consequences that any small act might have in the region. To better understand what the ICC is and the meaning of its decision, I am absolutely thrilled to have with us again on JBS, all the way from Israel, Ben-Dror Yemini. Yemini, who is a frequent guest on JBS and a very familiar face across the American Jewish world, is a journalist, speaker, a leading political commentator in Israel, and the author of the book, Industry of Lies, published in 2014, dealing with anti-Israel bias. Ben-Dror, it's such a pleasure to have you with us again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Show us the book again. Show us the book, because I really think that it's one of the most important books you should have, read, and let your children read as well, because knowing the facts and educating yourself about the situation is key to be able to cope with what we see out there. Thank you, Ben-Dror.
Thank you. Only by Amazon, by the way.
Thank you very much for sharing, and good to know. I personally read the book both in Hebrew and English, I have to admit, and found it illuminating and allows me to engage in this arena in a much more position. Let me first ask you, dealing with the issue at hand, what is exactly the International Criminal Court? Because we know there is already an International Court of Justice in The Hague, and sometimes people get confused if it's the same court or these two different tribunals. What is this exactly?
There are some international tribunals. It's not the only one. The ICC was established in 2002, but it was actually was discussed before by many countries. And let me tell you that Israel was pushing in order to establish this court as one of the lessons of what happened in the Holocaust. I mean, people who are committing genocide, any crime against humanity, should be punished. And what happened is that eventually Israel did not approve, the Israeli government did not approve joining to the ICC, just as the United States did not. Just in the same time, speaking about 2002, it was in the summer of 2002. And why? Because there are some, just like always, when we are speaking about international bodies, there is what we might call automatic majority against Israel. And I think the United States did not join the ICC because they did not want any international body to persecute American citizens or soldiers. It's much more than that even. In the United States, they have an act, I will give you just the name of the act, the Hague Invasion Act. Put it in Google, you will find this kind of act, which, and the meaning is...
The Hague Invasion Act.
Just like that. Each one from our audience can put just the invasion act. And the point is that they are warning. I mean, it was, by the way, bipartisan. It was not of the Republicans or of the Democrats. I mean, both parties were united about the issue. If you will dare to deal with one of our soldiers, officers, or citizens, we are going to invade Hague in order to rescue him. And we are not going to cooperate in any way.
What you're saying now is amazing, because you're talking about the International Criminal Court as a tribunal that supposedly is meant to cope and prevent situations of genocide and war crimes, and especially learning the lessons of the Holocaust. And then you have state parties like Israel, the Jewish state.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what happened in the discussions before it was confirmed, before it began to work. What happened is that the terror, for example, we are speaking about 2002. Let me remind you, 2001. The 9/11, and somehow, because of many other countries, because they could not even agree about what terror is, they decided eventually to not to include terror in the authority of the ICC.
I have to stop you there, Ben-Dror. They weren't able in 2002 to acknowledge what terror was, and these were
exactly. They could not agree about the definition of what is terror. And you know why, and we know why. It's because of political reasons. Because what they say is that every terror operation against Israel is part of the resistance to the occupation. So somehow, without saying it directly, somehow they justify or legitimize.
Ben-Dror, you're talking about the summer of 2002.
Exactly.
Was a few months after defense.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what happened. So that's why it was not the only one reason, but one of the reasons why Israel decided eventually not to join the ICC. And rightly so. And it's not that in that time, it was not something that was under debate. I mean, it was agreed upon in the US Congress, and it was agreed upon by all parts of the Israeli public. I mean, left-wingers, right-wingers, they all agreed that Israel should not join the ICC. Now, let me tell you something. Comparing to other international tribunals, it's not the worst one. Not at all. It's not. So here I am coming and tell you, you know what? It's not the worst one from one hand. But from the other hand, we have to bear in mind that there is a huge pressure on the ICC in order to convict Israel, in order to blame Israel, in order to show that Israel is committing crimes against humanity and war crimes and so on. And we know the international campaign that it's actually arguing that Israel is committing endlessly crimes against humanity, which is a lie. In order to understand that this is a lie, even if you read it 100 times every year, it's a lie. In order to understand it, in order to know the numbers, in order to know the circumstances, in order to know the facts, you have, sorry to say it, you have to read my book, because everything is there. Numbers, proportions, what really happened, and so on and so on. But the point is that even when we are talking about the ICC, there are several stages.
Before we dive into the technicalities of the ICC, I want to go back one step. So you're saying that the ICC is not one of the, not the worst of international mechanisms that is employed against Israel. So this relates to a greater problem. When you have within the international system, you have different organs, tribunals that are supposed to do good, and then they're being politically manipulated for these reasons that actually steer them away from what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Into the political arena.
And the worst
another example, just so that
the worst organization is the Human Rights Council of the UN, based in Geneva. Now, very strange. They're dealing with human rights, but the problem is that they really have an automatic majority against Israel. So for each 100 decisions against Israel, you have something like 2 or 3 decisions about the rest of the world. I mean, they have on the focus, they have in their agenda so many decisions against Israel that it's becoming, I'm sorry to say it, I'm not using it a lot. It's not anymore anti-Zionism, it's obsession, it's anti-Semitism. How much can you deal with Israel? I mean, you don't speak about China and the Uyghurs. You don't speak about what's happening in Russia. You don't speak about what's happening in Saudi Arabia. You don't speak about Libya. You don't speak about the NATO bombardments in Libya some years ago. You don't speak about anything. You speak only about one thing: Israel. Israel is not committing crimes. Israel is fighting the jihad. People do not understand what is Hamas. Hamas is not a legitimate organization. Hamas is a terror organization, part of the global jihad. And wherever you have global jihad, you have destruction and bloodshed. It has nothing to do with Israel. People do not understand it, unfortunately. Hamas was offered again and again. It is connected to the ICC. Hamas was offered again and again by the international community, by the UN, by the EU. No more siege. No more siege. We don't need this kind of closure. But no more terror. What do you think the answer was? What do you think the answer was? They said, no, we do not accept it. So when people blame Israel in committing this kind of closure, siege against the Gaza Strip, they don't know the circumstances. Unfortunately, the most reliable newspapers, like the New York Times, they never publish. They never publish. Just show me one time that the New York Times mentioned the fact that actually the Hamas rejected all the international proposals in order to stop the siege. They never mention it.
That's why one of your most famous statements from, I think, from your book, and I think that's a very good fact to share with our viewers and with everyone willing to listen, is if Israel is being criticized for killing so many Muslims and so many Arabs, 99% of Muslims killed around the world are killed by fellow Muslims. And
exactly. And about most of them, by the way, we don't know, because who cares about what's happening in Nigeria, in Somalia? I'm speaking only about terror. I'm not speaking about the wars that are taking place right now in 3 places, in Syria, in Yemen, and in Libya. I'm not speaking about it. I'm speaking only about the terror organizations like Al-Shabaab, like Boko Haram, like Taliban, and many others.
Still, they weren't able to reach a definition of terrorism.
Yeah, now they don't want to define terror because some countries are actually supporting in one way or another the terror. Look what's happening right now in Libya. There is a big struggle between the government, which is part of the Muslim Brothers and is backed by Turkey, for example. And the opposition is against the Muslim Brothers and the jihad and so on. And the debate is taking place in many other places, and the terror is taking place in many other places. But it is totally ignored, unfortunately, by the leading newspapers in the world. Why? Because if yesterday there was a terror operation and 70 people were killed somewhere in Nigeria, they don't care about it. But if 2 Palestinians were injured in the Gaza border, it will be in the first page of many other newspapers. So this kind of disproportion is affecting the public opinion. And when people are not aware to what Israel is facing, namely part of the jihad, because the Hamas is part of the jihad, so they do not know, and then they blame Israel, and then you see this kind of so many organizations, and you see so many articles of people who are totally against Israel, and they repeatedly say Israel is committing crimes against humanity, Israel is committing war crimes, which is a lie when you know the facts.
So, Ben-Dror, let's go back to the ICC. You were talking about the structure, the process. Enlighten us on that.
Okay, the process is that the general prosecutor, which right now is Fatou Bensouda, that's her name, she decided that she should begin to investigate allegations against Israel about war crimes. During the last protective age operation in 2014 and the demonstrations that took place in the Gaza border. You know what? Fair enough. And then she asked the court, the judges, if they have, the ICC, if they have the authority in order to begin the investigation. So out of 3 judges, 2 decided yes, 1 decided no. Was it political? I'm afraid yes.
Just procedurally speaking, the initiative to even go down that path, was it her initiative, or did the Palestinians reach out?
A lot of files were given to her, and she had to decide what is she going to do with all these files. She decided that she should open investigation only if it will be authorized by the judges, but by the judges themselves.
So and they have to decide if Palestine is a state that is relevant.
Exactly, because they have jurisdiction only if it is a state, or only if it was referred by the Security Council of the UN. In this case, it was the story of is it a state or not, because it was filed by the Palestinian Authority. And so they decided eventually that, yes, they do have jurisdiction with a kind of manipulation, because it's not a state. And what they decided contradicts the Oslo Agreement. So you cannot conclude something else. I mean, it is political, because according to the international agreements that were recognized by the international community, like the Oslo Agreement, they do not have the jurisdiction, but they decided the opposite.
Can they do something? Can they announce an investigation into a state that's not party to the statute?
That's exactly what they did right now. Now, Israel is not going to cooperate, just like, by the way, they decided to launch an investigation against the US. And the US told them, we are warning you. And when Fatou Bensouda, the general prosecutor of the ICC, wanted to come to the United States, they told her, we are sorry, you don't have a visa. You cannot even land here, because the moment that you will be here, we are going to arrest you.
That same prosecutor.
The same, of course, we are speaking about same. But this is only the first stage. Second stage is actually to begin the investigation.
By the way, as a side note, just a quick whisper, do you expect the Biden administration to have a different approach vis-a-vis Fatou Bensouda, or it's an American interest?
It's a very good question, but concerning the jurisdiction, I mean, even Biden must obey the American law, and the American law is saying the Hague Invasion Act is saying,
amazing act,
in a very clear way,
and
you cannot.
Bipartisan.
You can, but of course, in 2002, you cannot cooperate with the ICC. So they are not going to cooperate. So it was not something which is one-sided because of Donald Trump or something. Not at all. It's American law, and you have to obey the American law. Now, the first announcement of the Biden administration was, sorry, we are against the decision of the ICC. They published it 3 weeks ago when it was decided upon. They declared we are against it. It doesn't mean anything for the moment, but officially they are against the investigation against Israel. That's officially. Now, this is the first stage, but let me tell you something. It was decided upon just the same way to investigate Britain because of war crimes that were committed in Iraq. It was decided upon by the ICC. And there was an investigation against Britain. 180 pages of investigation, and they declared that Britain committed, Britain committed war crimes. But nothing happened. And why nothing happened? Because of one reason. Because if a state, any state, it can be Britain, it can be Holland, it can be Germany, if a state has a reliable judicial system, they do not keep on, and they leave it to the state to judge the crimes and to investigate the crimes and to deal with the crimes.
Did Britain cooperate with the court?
Not really. So, but the conclusion was that Britain committed war crimes. But by the way, there is not, now the soldiers were in court. And I know what happened actually. They received something which is not even funny. I mean, very, very something like the worst was 1 year in jail. The worst one, which means they did judge them, but not in a very severe way. Now, the point is that whenever you have any kind of complaint about a war crime, and there are many complaints about war crimes, which is something which is very legitimate, just like against soldiers from Canada, from Britain, from the US, from other countries, which is very legitimate. Israel is investigating. And sometimes when needed, soldiers were sent to jail. Now, I'm not going to tell you that no Israeli soldier committed a war crime. In every conflict, in every battlefield, war crimes are committed, unfortunately. I can tell you that Israel is committing war crimes much less than any other country. I can prove it, it's not the time.
That's also in your book.
It's exactly, and I give the numbers and I give all the details. Now, but every conflict, unfortunately, is producing war crimes. The question is how many, in what circumstances, but yes, war crimes. Now, I can tell you that Israel committed war crimes much less than in any other conflict.
You mentioned a very important point that the strength of the judicial and prosecutorial system of a country, let's say the UK, or in this case, Israel, may protect Israel from
exactly.
the ICC.
And that's why out of the 3 subjects that the ICC decided to investigate, 2 of them one of them is dealing with a protective edge operation. The second one is with the demonstrations on the Gaza border, where also citizens were killed. And the third one is about the settlements. Speaking about the first 2 issues, about civilians that unfortunately were killed, Israel is going to be totally clear, because every case was investigated.
Right.
Most of the people who were killed in protected edge and in the demonstrations were from the jihad and from the Hamas. It can be proved. Unfortunately, the New York Times, for example, published a huge reportage about one nurse that was killed in the border. What they did not show is what was her activity. She did not come in order to help medically. She was there as part of the resistance, which means part of the terror. And she herself, you can see it in a movie that was not published, unfortunately, in the New York Times, that she is part of the jihad. Now, that's why I'm saying that I'm not afraid of that. Every case can be proved. Every case, every complaint. But in some cases, when some soldiers were not careful enough, yes, they were taken to court. It happened. That's what I'm telling. I mean, no army is exempted from investigations. The only question is if the army is conducting the investigations in a honest way. Israel is doing it, no doubt about it. It can be proved. The third issue is the settlements. It's not easy. Settlements, it's a very political issue. Now, the kind of authorization that was somehow given to Israeli settlers to be in the territories, it is not going to be accepted by the ICC. I'm not going to go into it because of one reason. Because in Israel, as everybody knows, there is a big debate. Is it legitimate or not?
Can that debate protect Israel?
That's a good question. And I don't have a good answer. I know that I'm supposed to give you an answer to everything.
No,
I don't.
You're just narrowing our ability.
Yeah, no. I must admit that I'm not sure about it.
Assuming that they come out with the investigation with this book that says Israel commits war crimes, what is the enforceability of those conclusions, even if they reach such conclusions?
Practically, they can arrest Israeli officers or Israeli ministers or ex-ministers. I mean, for example, Tzipi Livni can be arrested. She can be arrested. Practically, it can happen. It might, by warrants of the ICC. It can happen. I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to happen, but actually, it can happen. I don't think many countries are going to cooperate with the ICC because some countries, even in Europe, not only the United States, already declared, sorry, we are not going to cooperate with this kind of investigation against Israel because it's a political issue. Israel is not committing crimes, as you say, and if something wrong is happening, and sometimes it does, Israel is investigating itself. So Israel is a democratic country with a very reliable judicial system. So that's why we are not going to cooperate, and we are not going to arrest Tzipi Livni, who will come to a visit in Germany. So we don't really know what is going to happen, but it might happen.
Ben-Dror, I have 1,000 more questions for you to ask you about this topic, and I wish we had more time, but I just want to give you a big thanks on behalf of myself and the audience for giving us so many pearls of wisdom so that we're able to conduct a proper conversation on this important issue.
Thank you so much for having me. And we do hope that the international community will be much less biased against Israel. It will help to solve the conflict. What is happening now is an obstacle to a fair solution to the Israeli-Arab conflict.
Thank you very much for your insights, Ben-Dror.
Thank you.
It's really unfortunate to see how the political machinations of taking something that's supposed to have such a high vocation and bringing it down to a degree of politicization that is of no use for the international community. And that's why I think we learned from you today that we see the support of so many other countries which understand that this is not just a risk for Israel, this is a general risk, the politicization of these international tribunals. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of our viewers for providing so many important facts and information. And I urge our viewers to read that book. To all, we want to say, stay safe and stay healthy. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golub, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Thank you very much for joining us. Shalom and lehitraot.